Hello and welcome to another edition of the One Drink Book Club. Today we'll be talking about Project Hail Mary by Andy Weir. Project Hail Mary is a science fiction novel that follows the journey of Ryland Grace, a lone scientist who wakes up in a spaceship with no memory of how he got there. His memory gradually returns and he realizes that he's on a suicide mission to save life on Earth. My guest today is my friend Marc Wallace, who is my guide for all things science fiction. Welcome, Marc.
Thanks, Jamey. I'm glad we finally got to do this. It's been a long time in the making here.
I guess the first thing on the agenda is, what drink did you bring, inspired by Andy Weir's book here?
Yeah, this was a tough one because I was looking for something creative, but there wasn't a lot to go on, although you probably are going to one-up me on this one. But there was a scene in the halfway through the book where they're in training, where you've got, the three astronauts that are supposed to go on the Hail Mary. There's Chinese Commander Yao, who is drinking a German beer. So I have a German beer. That's
Nice.
one thing. And then you have Ilyukna, who's the Russian engineer, who is drinking vodka. So I have some straight vodka here. And then lastly, there's Dubois, who is the scientist that's supposed to be an astronaut, who's drinking a Cabernet. So I have one of each one of those. So I have three drinks. Now, we all know
Nice.
Dubois ends up not making the trip, and that's why our hero gets in there. But he was drinking his cab, so that's what I have today.
Nice. Well, I think that's very creative. I
Thanks.
really struggled with this. I made a Petrova Paloma. That's what I called it here. And you
Yeah,
can't
well
really
done. Yeah.
tell. You can tell a little bit. I basically I added an orange at the bottom and it as a slice, so that it looks like the top of the sun, and I stuck a cherry stem into the sun to form a Petrova line. So in the book, the Petrova
Awesome.
line is kind of like a infrared red line that these microbes are making based on that are causing all the problems with our world.
That's right. Yep.
Um, so, uh, I don't want to. One of the things I really loved about this book, Marc, and thank you for the suggestion, was I felt like it was like three books in one. I mean, there's a little bit of a mystery, kind of like a mystery thriller thing, because this guy wakes up with two dead astronauts in the same room with him. He has no idea where he is. He doesn't even know he's in space, and he has to kind of figure out what's going on. His memory kind of comes back. So it's a little bit of a mystery. Then there's lots of science fiction. They're traveling in space. There's these big problems. There's a lot of like science problem solving, and then it's also a bit of a bromance. The relationship between him and Rocky, his friend, is kind of a neat aspect. Was there any part of which one of those was kind of your favorite aspects?
Well, yeah, I love The Martian, and Andy Weir's science and dry humor comes out almost immediately in the book, which is great. It does start off differently than his other books that I've read anyway, Martian and Artemis, in that it's kind of a detective story in the very beginning. What's going on, and so that's different, and that you enjoy kind of the revealing bit by bit as he has flashbacks to his why he's here, the creation of the problem, and how he gets selected ultimately to be on this mission, and then who those other two comrades are that didn't make it. We figure that out eventually, but Weir also uses the flashbacks to kind of describe the problem of why Project Hail Mary is on this mission in the first place. So I thought that was great. I think the I'm a sci-fi geek, and I love the science, and I think Andy Weir does a good job of diving into kind of technical problems and describing the science and math behind it in a pretty accurate way, without making it boring.
Yeah.
So he
Well,
does a
and I
great job
was
of that.
that was my question, another question for you is you're far more of a STEM guy than I am. And I wondered how good Andy was at actually kind of, that if you really knew science, were you saying, "Oh, he's simplifying that," or "That wouldn't work," or things like that? And it sounds like you thought he did a good job.
Yeah, I think especially in the beginning, I mean, towards the end where they're, diving into the planet together, it gets more of a Hollywood dramatic scene. Um, it gets a little crazy, but yeah, just explaining, the basic science as, to kind of the layperson. I think he does a really good job at that. He did that. He's done that in his other 2 books, I think, really well, and I think that gives it an element of, um, I don't know, it really gives it some punch, and, even the geeks like me can enjoy it, but also the people that don't really understand can enjoy it, and I think he does a fantastic job of that, and
Yeah, there
accurate.
were parts of I read The Martian before I read this one, and I haven't read
Mhm.
Artemis, but, I felt like this if you enjoyed The Martian and all the problem solving that happened where the main character there is stuck on Mars and has to figure out how to make his supplies last and handle all the communication problems, and he kind of does it in a very clever way. If you like that, you would also like this. Ryland Grace, the main character there,
100%.
is
Yeah,
same kind of thing, smart and clever, um, and really enjoys trying to solve these problems.
yep. Of course, we don't know
Um,
his name is Ryland Grace for a while. I mean, it takes a while before you actually you figure out what his name is, which is good in what he does. It turns out he's a junior high school teacher, very smart one. But that was interesting as well, the kind of the evolution of how he gets sucked into the whole problem, that the Earth is dealing with.
and I thought he was a great character. Like he was, as you said, funny. Like a lot of the almost all the humor is coming from the main character, and he's a little irreverent. Um, and I mean, he's a high school or a middle school science teacher that everybody would have wanted to have. Like he would have been the most popular teacher in school
Right,
for sure.
right.
Um, and uh, I also thought, and again, this is a little bit of a spoiler alert, but the relationship between Ryland and Rocky. Rocky is a different alien who ends up in the same solar system as Ryland, trying to solve the same problem. Rocky's people have realized that their sun is being sucked away by this problem, and so he was there and all of his crewmates died as well. And so the two of them are kind of the lone people left in order to solve this problem for both of their worlds. And it's a super cute relationship where they become really very good friends. Um, I loved Rocky.
Yeah, I think and, this is gonna be a movie in a year too with, Ryan Gosling too. So, it'll be interesting how they pull that off on the screen. As science fiction writers, I think, struggle with aliens in general. So it's really tough, especially if you have a benevolent alien, it's not like,
Yeah.
somebody trying to wipe out the human race or anything. And so, I think that Andy Weir does a really good job of explaining Rocky's existence through science and, describing why he is like he is. And, um, Rocky, of course, uh, he's like a spider. He has 5 legs, claws. lives in, mercury for blood, kinda, lives in super high pressure. It's really, and it doesn't has sonar, doesn't have any eyes, right? It doesn't have any, way to see light. So that's a whole, adventure how they try to figure that out and then communicate with each other. And so you're right. I mean, it is another story within the story. I mean, they have to obviously solve this problem, and the problem, I think we haven't really talked about that. I mean, the problem is, these, microbes, attack our sun, and it turns out they're just, doing what like every microbe does and trying to survive. So they're eating the heat of the sun and then going to Venus and eating carbon dioxide and multiplying and going back and forth and ultimately absorbing the heat from the sun and dimming it, which is creating this ice age on Earth. And they finally, after they can understand what's going on, identify Tau Ceti, which is this other star that seems to have the problem, but doesn't seem to be getting any worse. And so Project Hail Mary is to go to this other solar system and determine why. And it turns out that Rocky's Arid, which is his planet, developed a spaceship to send their Project Hail Mary at the same time. So that's how they meet up.
Yeah, it's a really creative, setup, and I mean, the fun part, I think, as the author is to have Rocky, and who can introduce, like, alien technology, so there's things that you wouldn't be able to do, as part of, with American technology or Earthling technology that he kinda can fill in the gaps, and so and like you said, Rocky can't see anything. He can't see light. He's all sonar. So they both bring things to the table too, because it turned out Rocky was also not one of the scientists on his flight. He was more of an engineer, and he knows how to build things, but he doesn't necessarily know all the science thing. And Ryland is not really an engineer, but he is a scientist. So they
Mhm.
complement each other well on their um, on their skills, essentially. And it's a fun explain the challenges they had with communicating and how Rocky communicates.
Well, so yeah, it's almost like a musical, uses sound to communicate and to see. So he's using sonar um, to move around. The entire ship is kind of developed in that way. Develops using this xenonite that turns out is a super uh, strong material that ends up being, something that Earth didn't have, and Ryland takes, to send back to Earth as kind of the gift ultimately. Where they can build space elevators and everything. And then in return, it turns out that Rocky, his entire crew dies because Arid never knew what radiation was because they never were out in deep space, and they all died from radiation while Rocky was down in the engine room essentially of his ship, where it was protected by xenonite. So it's very interesting. And again, creative. I did think, you said Americans, you used the word Americans, but there's some irony in the whole story, and that, Earth, the whole uh, Project Hail Mary is has a Russian, a Chinese, and an American astronaut on it. And, when Andy Weir wrote this, years ago now, like a few years ago, whatever, much different climate, I think, between the countries. So it's kinda there's the irony there, and then, of course, the irony of global cooling and one of the, whole, parts of the story is the human race basically, uh, releasing tons of methane to heat up the planet and, like, accelerate global warming. So there's a lot of, ironic things, and I'm not sure, what Weir's intention was there, but ironic nonetheless.
There's a great character. I mean, there really aren't a whole lot of characters in this book, but one of the a fun character is the Eva Strat, who is basically the countries of the world, once they realize this problem, they realize the gravity of the problem, um, it's somewhat impressive how they decide to cut through essentially all the bureaucracy, and they appoint this woman, who is a Dutch woman, who is clearly very smart, no nonsense, a very hard driver, to be the project manager for Project Hail Mary, and she has essentially all of the authority she would ever need from anyone. So, there's a scene where they, show up in court because one of the things they gave the astronauts on the Hail Mary was essentially every publication ever created. And so, because they said, "Well, we don't know what kind of situations you're gonna run into, so we want to make sure they have access to anything, any knowledge that the human race has come up with." And a group of people who were publishers and copyright owners tried to
Yeah.
sue Project Hail Mary, and she shows up in court with no lawyers, nothing, she just basically says, "Well, I have this letter from essentially the UN and the president that says I can do whatever I want and that it bypasses any existing laws." And they even tried to, say, "Well, you still need to stay here for the rest of this hearing." And she said, "No, I don't." And 5, soldiers from the US Army came in and escort her out, because the bailiff was just about to, kind of hold her back, and she says, "You and what army? Because I have the US Army behind me, and I think they're a pretty good army." She was a fun character, and,
Yeah.
uh, clearly the whole thing wouldn't have gotten off the ground without her behind it.
That whole IP, intellectual property court scene is kind of interesting in the book. It's this little segment, but it does do a good job at illustrate just her authority, and you're kind of like, "Yes." Keep moving. Um, and we all
Well,
wish we had that authority to some of these IP, people, but yeah.
yeah. He purposely put in the term patent trolls in that scene, which I
Yeah.
thought of you 'cause, I know that
Yeah,
that's
exactly,
been
yeah.
something you've
I
had
need
to deal with.
I need to hire Eva Strat, I think. So, there's the whole, Eva, and the Strat, Ryland Grace kinda relationship is kinda interesting too. They have it's almost like there's a romantic tension between the 2, um, that never really, clicks in throughout the whole story, which is interesting. You almost expect this flashback where, they finally get together, but, they never do, and ultimately, we find out that Grace is kind of chicken to go in the first place, and, uh, when Dubois, who I'm drinking the cab for right now, it ends up blowing himself up experimenting with, the fuel, and, it goes Weir goes through how the, explosion was caused by a measurement error. It was kind of a nod to these, space measurement errors that every now and then creep up and fail a mission. But he ends up getting blown up, and then, they have to tap in Grace because in order to make the trip, you have to be coma resistant, and, turns out Grace has the genetics to do that, but he refuses to go, and they end up, basically, drugging him and throwing him on the ship, and he doesn't realize that, uh, what happened until he finally wakes up outside of, Tau Ceti. It's kinda interesting. But then, and he has some redemption there where he kinda claims, "I would've of course, I'll do my best, and I will, participate and do my duty and everything." So, that's kinda interesting, and at the end of the day, he ends up solving the problem and saving Earth, so Strat did the right thing,
Um,
apparently.
well, and that was actually the only part of the book I didn't necessarily agree with, because as you learn about Ryland Grace's personality with all of these flashbacks, and he's flashing back to, scenes in the classroom with his students, and him learning about the microbe that is causing all these problems is called astrophage. and he came up with a name, and in the way that he did all of that, um, it didn't seem like that person that you got to know and that you got to know throughout his narration through the story would be the same person who would say, "Be too chicken to get on the flight." I mean,
True.
because
Yeah.
he also knew that they were all gonna die, because this ice age was coming and that they wouldn't be able to survive. So, you're either gonna die on this mission, or you're gonna die in a few years when the Earth is no longer sustainable. And so that part where they had to kind of like hog tie him and put him on the flight just didn't ring true to me in how I felt like I knew the character.
Yeah.
Um, Especially when he saw how he acted with Rocky, there were a few situations, again, not trying to throw in spoilers, where, they both Rocky and Ryland had to sacrifice, for one another, in a very selfless way. And, I think he did it with flying colors, which again kind of doesn't jive with the idea that he would have refused to go on the original mission.
If he was given more time to think about it, and it kinda all happened very quickly, "I don't wanna go." "Okay, knock him over the head." He's going. Um,
You're going.
so, yeah. And, yeah, I agree. Very that he plays the hero well, very compassionate, as is Rocky. Um, I think that all is done very well. I would say, while you're pointing out things that maybe, rubbed you the wrong way, I didn't like the ending so much in that,
Mm.
he enjoying kinda being in this inhospitable planet, he ultimately,
Yeah.
goes to Rocky's planet and, becomes a teacher there, which I thought was I don't know, maybe a little too goofy at the end, and then it doesn't we learn about the Earth's fate, which is great, but, doesn't really, resolve itself at the end, so you're left kind of like, "Okay, now what?"
Yeah, I think, yeah, it's almost like a little anticlimactic at the very end, but there's a lot of, you know, exciting stuff that happens throughout. I mean, like I said, it's a little bit more of a thriller. It's not just a, "Hey, we've gotta solve this problem on," a blackboard. They really run into some life-threatening problems that they have to solve while they're in space and trying to figure this out. So I think I think it'll be a great movie. How do you feel about Ryan Gosling as Ryland Grace?
I'm a I was scratching my head at first, but then the more I thought about it, I think it's gonna be fantastic. I think he'll be I think The Martian, obviously, movie, um, with Matt Damon was pulled off perfectly.
Yeah.
He's got kinda that wry sense of humor. I think Ryan Gosling could do the same thing here, which is kinda what Andy Weir writes how he writes. Rocky, again, is gonna be interesting, how they do that.
Yeah.
I do when they go Adrian, which is the planet that, turns out, uh, that, Adrian's key in that solar system because it has the natural predator of the astrophage, which is the
Yeah.
microbe that's eating our sun. Astrophage, which he points out is Greek for star eater, which I thought was pretty good. Um,
Yeah.
they have to go collect it. So that's a crazy scene that I'm sure is gonna be fantastic in the movie, and then it, leads to a bunch of different other dramatic scenes. So, yeah, no, I think that's, gonna make for a great movie.
Well, it'll be interesting too to see how they portray Rocky. As you said, his speech is really like a series of sounds. And in my own way, I mean, my analogy to it was a little bit like R2D2, where he made like beeping sounds and things, and other people could tell what he was doing or saying just from his kind of attitude and, body language if he hopped up and down and things like that. And the thing that Rocky has that's really interesting is like a very interesting speech pattern as he kind of learns English and is trying to speak back to Ryan or Ryland in his language. It's not quite. uh, to use another Star Wars analogy, it's not quite like Yoda, but there is a little bit of a
Right.
goofy speech pattern, which is very endearing in the book. It'll be interesting to see how they portray it in the movie.
Yeah, like when, he has claws, right? And they become very informal with each other, and he says, once they succeed in one thing, he goes, "Fist my bump," right? Is one of his but,
Yes.
in the book, they seem to have this, translator that Ryland has made where, like, Rocky will sing and it'll blurt out to English. So I imagine in the movie that's how they're gonna have him communicate probably, but,
Yeah.
yeah, and then the claws are jazz hands, so they every time they do something every time they do something successful, the jazz hands each other, which is kinda funny. Um, yeah, no, I think it's r exciting book as we had tried to do this a year ago, and it's just, scheduling, we couldn't get it, so I've read it again, and, every time you read it, you catch a few more things, especially when he's diving into kind of the science of, the different components, like the astrophage and how it actually lives and, um, how it actually, eats the heat and preserves the heat and, how they end up using it for fuel to actually drive Hail Mary. It's very interesting, um, especially, again, to, like, a geeky science guy like me.
Well, talking about irony, the irony is the astrophage is what is killing the sun, but without astrophage, they wouldn't, as a fuel for their new rocket, they wouldn't have been able to get to the place where they could solve the problem. So, I mean, there's kind of this interesting connection there. It
Yeah.
and so I thought overall it was great, and I enjoyed the characters, enjoyed the story. Um, You like I said, you're kind of my science fiction guru where you're always giving me great suggestions on books. What do you look for in a good science fiction, novel?
And I love science fiction. That's basically all I read. There's 2 types, I think, of science fiction. One is the more kinda entertaining, made to be a movie kind of, science fiction, where, you can read it, you kinda plow through it really quickly. Um, I think this kinda falls into that category. Andy
Sure.
Weir does a really good job technically, so, you have that element of, science to it that's, nice and nerdy. Then there's kinda the real heavy stuff, the Neil Stephenson, long, it's gonna take you a while to get through it, and there's periods where, in the Stevenson books where he's going into the science that takes chapters and, takes some fortitude to get through, but at the end of the day, like, it's super rich, and, then there's just kinda the classics. I'm still to this day, my favorite sci-fi series is the 2001 series by, Arthur C. Clarke. So, reading
Wow.
2001 all the way through to 3001, which is the final installment of the series, and, um, it's amazing how a lot of the stuff that Clarke wrote about when he wrote those novels have come true, which is interesting. So, I think that
Oh,
that
I've never read those.
yeah, those great,
I'll
great books.
I'll have to put it on the list.
Yep. Should be on everybody's list. All of them. You gotta read all of them though. There's 4 of them.
Well, and we've talked about maybe another podcast in the future doing the 3 body problem, which,
Mhm.
is a trilogy out there. There's a 4th book that, a different author wrote, but has been kind of endorsed by the original author. Great, great story. And I thought it followed, some of the same, aspects of Andy Weir's in that there's a big problem. It's, futuristic. There's a lot of science and space and those kind of things in it, but it was also a little bit of a psychological thriller as well. Um, and so it was entertaining on a lot of levels.
And what the three bottom body problem does, which some of these good science fiction series do, is kind of hypothesize around like what could be out there, right? Why, like, what's all these questions? What is the universe? Why are we here? Kind of stuff. And I think the three body problem series does a great job of giving a theory. You know, this may be an answer. I think that's great, and it's a very entertaining series, and now a Netflix series.
The one science fiction actually, I think the first science fiction book you ever recommended to me was Ready Player One, which
Mm,
was a fantastic book, and I really enjoyed it, and then I hated the movie. So I've
yeah.
been a little, like, down on the movie versions of science fiction,
Mhm.
just because that one was, I thought, so bad. Like, it made no s and it was Steven Spielberg who directed it, you kind of
Yeah.
expected a lot out of that one. Ah,
Yeah, that was a great book. The other book that we talk about a lot of the Hugh Howey books, the Wool Silas series. Those are, very entertaining. You can really, get through those pretty quickly because you just can't put them down. But those are
yeah,
fantastic. Yeah.
agreed, agreed. Well, Mark, thank you so much. It was a long time, coming
Yeah.
here. Thanks
Mm.
for, doing this.
Yeah, thanks, Jamie. Now I gotta finish the 3 drinks I have.
Alrighty then. Well, thanks again for, coming on the show, and thank you for listening here. If you haven't subscribed, please subscribe on YouTube or on any of the podcast platforms, and, stay tuned for another One Drink Book Club.